story is that Big Jake got killed by Wolf, who was Puff's main bodyguard. Right. Wolf is dead as well. After it happened, the story was that Suge was blaming, since one of Puff's guys allegedly killed his man.
He was a shooter. Yo, Meech, look out for my man. Put him on your payroll. You need somebody to do work for you just like that. Whoop they whoop. He did that. You understand? And that's the dude who shot him in Riz.
It's interesting in the Wolf case because your friends will push you further than your enemies at that point. Because they won't see how far they're going with things.
Before the East Coast-West Coast War had a name, it had a moment. And that moment happened on the night of September 23, 1995, in the parking lot of a club in Atlanta. Suge Knight's best friend is shot and left bleeding in the dark. Witnesses point to the shooter, Anthony Wolf Jones Diddy's bodyguard, his childhood friend from Harlem, and Bad Boy's head of security. Wolf was never charged. The case was never solved.
Detectives say, well, we ain't gonna do nothing about that. In other words, whatever you saying now means.
But Suge didn't need a verdict. He blamed Diddy, and what followed helped ignite one of the most infamous rivalries in hip-hop history, and that was only the beginning. 4 years later, Wolf is in another nightclub when gunfire erupts, this time in Manhattan, standing beside Diddy and Jennifer Lopez. Then in 2003, he's back in an Atlanta parking lot, where Big Meech is waiting. Suge Knight, Diddy, Big Meech, and how one man connects them all. Let's get into it. Anthony Wolf Jones grew up in Harlem, New York, in a neighborhood where your reputation was the only currency that mattered. He wasn't a rapper, he wasn't a manager, he was a street dude, someone who moved through the world a certain way and made people feel it when he walked into a room. That energy was what drew him to Sean Combs, and eventually to Bad Boy Records.
Wolf?
Yeah.
Who was Puffy's right-hand man, his muscle.
Yeah.
Basically the equivalent of you or Buntry, essentially, on Puffy's side.
The two of them went back to before the label, before the hits, before any of it. Wolf wasn't just hired muscle, he was a childhood friend, and in Diddy's world, that distinction meant everything. When Bad Boy started taking off in the early 90s and Biggie was selling millions of records and the label was the hottest thing in hip-hop, Wolf moved into the role of head of security. By 1995, Bad Boy was at its absolute peak. The Notorious B.I.G. had dropped Ready to Die the previous year. Faith Evans, Mase, and Total were all in the mix. The money was flowing, but so was the tension. Over on the West Coast, Suge Knight and Death Row Records were building their own empire, and the two labels were moving on a collision course that nobody could see clearly yet. Wolf was right in the middle of all of it, carrying Diddy's security like it was personal, because for him, it was. Before the first shot was fired, there was a mic. On August 3rd, 1995, the hip-hop industry gathered at Madison Square Garden in New York City for the Source Awards. Death Row had come to New York indeed, and Suge Knight used his moment on stage to throw a hand grenade straight at Puff Daddy. Standing at the podium, Suge said, and this is a direct quote, "Any artist out there that want to be an artist and want to stay a star and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the records, dancing, come to Death Row." The whole crowd knew exactly who he was talking about.
Any artist out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
Diddy was known for his cameos on his artists' tracks, his ad-libs, his face in the videos. Suge had just clowned him in front of the entire industry. But it wasn't just a diss. It was a recruitment pitch wrapped in disrespect. And it worked not because artists came running, but because it galvanized the coasts. And it came with context. Less than a year before, in November 1994, Tupac had been shot 5 times in the lobby of Quad Recording Studios in Manhattan, robbed of his jewelry, and left for dead. Tupac survived, but he came out of that hospital believing that Biggie and Diddy had prior knowledge of the attack and said nothing.
The night he was shot in the lobby of Quad Studios on November 30th, 1994, a hotspot for rap artists at the time, that's Sean Diddy Combs outside as police arrived on scene.
He never forgave them for it. By the summer of 1995, that wound hadn't healed, and Suge was pouring salt in it. So when Suge and Puffy both ended up in Atlanta in late September 1995, 1995, for a birthday party thrown by producer Jermaine Dupri. The room already had gasoline in it. All it needed was a spark. September 23rd, 1995. Both camps descended on Atlanta. Jermaine Dupri was celebrating his birthday at the Platinum House Club on West Peachtree Street in Midtown Atlanta, and everybody was there. Biggie and the junior MAFIA, members of the Bad Boy camp, and over from Death Row, Suge Knight's crew, two of the biggest labels in rap music, in the same building, on a night when the underlying tension between them had already been cooking for months. Jake Robles, known as Big Jake, was Suge Knight's right hand. He wasn't just an employee, he was a mob Piru blood, deeply embedded in the Death Row inner circle, and one of Suge's closest personal friends. The kind of dude that, if something happened to him, it wasn't just business, it was personal to Suge in a way that went beyond the label. At some point that night, a fight broke out. According to witness accounts, the confrontation spilled outside the club. In the chaos that followed, shots were fired, and Jake Robles was hit. He collapsed outside the Platinum House, seriously wounded, and was rushed to the hospital. He held on for several days. He died a week later from his injuries. Witnesses at the scene pointed to one of Puffy's bodyguards as the shooter. The name that kept coming up was Anthony Wolf Jones. A federal lawsuit filed years later by former Bad Boy employee Kirk Burroughs would go further, alleging that Combs had authorized the killing and that Wolf was the triggerman. Neither Combs nor Jones were ever charged. The Atlanta police never closed the case with an arrest.
When I get to the station, I hear real Atlanta police who threw Jake out the club telling the detective how this person handed this person a gun, how this person shot Jake. Detectives say, well, we ain't gonna do nothing about that. In other words, whatever you saying now don't mean shit.
But in the streets and in the music industry, the story was already written. Everybody knew what people were saying about who pulled the trigger that night. One detail that's been largely overlooked. On that same night, as Jake Robles was bleeding out, Suge Knight allegedly confronted Jermaine Dupri inside the club. According to reports, witnesses said Suge slapped Dupri, calling him a liar, an act that showed just how quickly Suge had formed his version of what happened.
Suge came back, boom, 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 boom. He came right in and slapped the shit out of Jermaine Dupri. Wow! Jermaine ran out the goddamn club.
He wasn't waiting for a police report. He had already decided who was responsible. Once Jake Robles was dead, Suge Knight made his position clear. He blamed Diddy directly, not one of Diddy's people, Diddy himself. In Suge's telling, the hit on his friend was sanctioned from the top, and from that moment, the Death Row Bad Boy feud became something different. It wasn't industry beef anymore, it was blood. Diddy tried to defuse it. He reached out through intermediaries, including Mustafa Muhammad, the son of Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, asking him to broker some kind of peace. According to a New York Times magazine cover story at the time, Diddy told Mustafa, if there's anything you can do to put an end to this, I'm with it. Suge refused to meet. He had no interest in a sit-down. He wanted something else. What he got was Tupac. In October 1995, just weeks after Jake Robles' death, Suge Knight posted Tupac Shakur's $1.4 million bail bond and secured his release from prison, signing him immediately to Death Row Records. Whether the timing was coincidence or calculation, the effect was immediate. Tupac came home enraged, focused, and ready to take the fight straight to Bad Boy. He started recording diss after diss targeting Biggie, Puffy, and anyone around them. The songs Hit 'Em Up, Against All Odds, and a string of other tracks over the next year amounted to the most vicious lyrical assault in hip-hop history. The East Coast-West Coast war was now fully lit, and a big part of the accelerant was what happened in that Atlanta parking lot the night. Big Jake got shot. Both Tupac and Biggie would be dead within a year of each other. September 1996. March 1997. The war had claimed its most famous casualties, and through all of it, Wolf Jones stayed close to Diddy, stayed out of the spotlight, and kept his head down. He'd been in the middle of the thing that started it all, and he'd walked away clean, at least for a while. December 27th, 1999, 4 years after Atlanta. This time, the location was Club New York in Midtown Manhattan. Diddy was there with his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez, his newest artist, Shine, a 19-year-old Belize-born rapper he'd signed to Bad Boy, the one people were saying was going to be the next Biggie, was also in the building, and so was Wolf. At some point during the night, someone in the club threw a handful of bills in Diddy's direction, a disrespectful move meant to humiliate. According to accounts of the incident, Diddy knocked a drink out of the man's hand. The situation escalated fast. Shine pulled out a gun and fired into the crowd.
But I definitely shot the guy that was trying to shoot me. I shot him in the shoulder. You know what I mean? And that's because, you know, after threatening us, after telling us they was gonna kill us, after saying they was gonna pop our head off.
3 people were hit, including a woman named Natanya Rubin, who was shot in the face. She would spend the next 25 years insisting that Combs was the one who shot her, a claim he has denied and that he was acquitted on. In the chaos that followed the shooting, Diddy and Lopez fled the scene in a car. Police pulled them over shortly after and discovered a handgun inside the vehicle. Diddy, Wolf, and Lopez were all arrested. What came next was a courtroom battle that stretched more than a year. Wolf testified at trial, telling the jury that when the shooting started, he threw himself on top of Combs to shield him. That image, the bodyguard covering his boss with his own body, became one of the defining moments of the case. On March 16, 2001, Diddy was acquitted on all charges. Wolf was cleared of gun possession and bribery charges. And Shine, the kid who was supposed to be the next Biggie, was convicted of assault, gun possession, and reckless endangerment. He got 10 years in prison.
The accusations against Shine, though, were more dire. Gun possession, reckless endangerment, assault, attempted murder. Shine's attorneys admitted their client fired his weapon.
He would later say in a Hulu documentary called The Honorable Shine that he was absolutely set up to be the fall guy in that shooting. What makes this even more layered is what Gene Deal, another one of Diddy's bodyguards, said in an interview with The Art of Dialogue. According to Deal, Wolf himself told him privately that Shine pulled the trigger. Wolf didn't say it publicly, Deal explained, because he had love for Shine. But in private, between people who were there, the story was clear. Wolf carried that knowledge, and he carried it quietly, the way he always did. By 2003, Bad Boy's golden era was over. The label had seen Biggie murdered, watched Shine go to prison, weathered the lawsuits and the beef and the losses. Diddy was still doing his thing. I Need a Girl, Danity Kane, all of it. But the intensity of the 90s was behind them. Wolf was still there, still in Diddy's circle, still doing what he'd always done. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, another empire had been quietly built. Demetrius, Big Meech, Flannery, and his brother Terry, Southwest T. Flannery, had turned the Black Mafia family, BMF, into one of the largest coke distribution networks in American history. By the early 2000s, BMF had operations from Atlanta to Los Angeles to Detroit, and Meech had embedded himself in the hip-hop world. He was showing up at video shoots, throwing parties, sitting courtside. Atlanta was his city, and he moved through it like the king. On the night of November 10, 2003, Big Meech was at Club Chaos in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood. It was a weekly hip-hop night hosted by Jermaine Dupri's So Def Entertainment. A detail worth noting, given that Dupri's birthday party was where the Big Jake story had started 8 years earlier. Atlanta, clubs, Jermaine Dupri, Wolf Jones. Some patterns don't break. Inside the club, Wolf Jones and Big Meech got into a confrontation. According to witness accounts, the altercation started over a woman, specifically an ex-girlfriend of Wolf's who was at the club. Meech reportedly stepped in, either to defend the woman or because the situation escalated beyond a conversation. However it started, it ended with security throwing Wolf out of the club. Wolf Jones left the building, but he didn't leave the parking lot. Around 1:30 in the morning, Big Meech and his associate Amin Bull Height walked out of Club Chaos and made their way toward Meech's Cadillac SUV in the parking lot. Wolf was there. His friend Lamont Riz Gertie was with him. Wolf had positioned himself near Meech's car. He was armed. What happened next was over in seconds. Gunshots erupted in the parking lot. When the smoke cleared, Wolf Jones and Riz Gertie were both dead. Big Meech and Bull Height had both been shot. Meech was hit in the buttocks, but they were alive. Dozens of shots had been fired. Demetrius Flannery and Amin Height were both arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder each. Meech's position was that he'd been running away, that he was the one under attack, that what happened was self-defense, and Fulton County prosecutors couldn't prove otherwise. The case against both men was dropped shortly after they were charged. citing lack of evidence and inability to prove criminal intent. No witnesses came forward to contradict the self-defense account. The case was closed without a conviction. Anthony Wolf Jones, the man who had reportedly put Jake Robles in the ground in 1995, walked away from the Club New York trial in 2001 and spent almost a decade as Diddy's most trusted enforcer, died in a parking lot in Atlanta at around 38 years old. For Diddy, by all accounts, losing Wolf was devastating. He wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a foundational piece of everything Diddy had built during the most dangerous years of his life. The man who had his back in Atlanta, in courtrooms, in clubs across the country, gone. But what came out in the years after Wolf's death told a different kind of story. Wolf had a daughter named Ash Cash, and in 2015, she spoke out publicly, saying that after her father was murdered, Diddy never reached out to her. Not a call, not a letter, not any kind of support. She said the only person from the bad boy world who reached out to her was Shine, the same man Wolf had reportedly told Gene Deal was the one who pulled the trigger in Club New York, the same man who had taken the fall and done 10 years in prison.
Do some of the artists.
But, yeah.
Do some of the artists say, hey, you know, you're...
No. Just Shine does. I spoke to Shine not too long ago. But that's really it. Shine is the only person that has reached out.
Shine, for his part, went further. He publicly blasted Diddy for not taking care of Wolf's family. In interviews, he made clear that he had no respect for how Combs had handled it. The man who had shielded him with his body had been killed, and as far as Shine was concerned, Diddy had written him off like he never existed. That's the final layer of Wolf's story. 3 massive moments in hip-hop history. 3 men, Suge Knight, Diddy, Big Meech, each at the center of their own era, their own empire, their own legend, and one man running through all of it, loyal to a fault, doing the work nobody talked about. Suge's man was allegedly dead because of Wolf. Diddy's freedom depended on Wolf, and in the end, Wolf went out the same way he came in, with a gun, in a parking lot, in Atlanta. Nobody made a documentary about it. Nobody held a press conference. His daughter waited for a call that never came, but the thread he left behind, connecting some of the most consequential moments in the history of hip-hop, that's still there if you know where to look.